Welcome to the Mycelium Network Podcast, a podcast all about early stage web developers and the mentors and teachers that help them along the way. Hey Juan, welcome to the Mycelium Network Podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me. Really excited to be here today. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation. So, on another podcast I run called the Mechanical Inc. podcast, I had a really good conversation with Abby and Nathri from GitHub about all things open source and all the cool stuff that GitHub's doing around that space. And the education thing came up during our conversation there. And they were like, you should speak to Juan because he runs all this stuff and he's really enthusiastic about this space. I was like, that would be great, and it would be a perfect fit for the Mycelium Network podcast because of what I do as part of this community. And hey, it happened, and here we are. So I kind of let the cat out of the bag that you are from GitHub. But without saying anything further, I'm going to give the floor to you and let you introduce yourself to everybody.
Yeah. We're spoiling the news for our listeners. So my name is Juan Pablo Flores. I'm a senior program manager here at the GitHub Education team, where my job is to help students across the world to, get opportunities on open source, help them to build awesome communities in their campus through the GitHub Campus Experts program. And I also kind of like, we do a little bit of everything, but as a whole, my job, my main role at GitHub is to support our students on the GitHub Campus Experts program, which is our developer program where we teach students how to build or grow welcoming communities on their campus so that they can help others get prepared before they graduate.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's definitely something I want to dig in a little bit more. On your Twitter, a website that's a little
Oh no.
heated at the moment. I saw you shared a photo of your first two tattoos. I'm always curious about, like, I don't have any myself, but I always know that when people do get these, there's usually a story behind it. So I don't know if you are open to sharing what's behind the story behind your first two.
Yeah, no, it's a whole story because, of course, I think the first tattoo is the one that you think about the most. I'm already thinking about doing like 2 or 3 more in the future, right? But the first one is so. I'm a very big fan of like cybernetics and anime and everything that has to do around that. And I saw these two very cool storyboards from Ghost in the Shell, the animated version. And when I saw them the first time, I was like, these drawings are just like absolutely amazing. They have really cool details about like the head of the kind of like of the shell, let's call it, because that's how it's called, the shell, right? Which is kind of like this robotic like head with a lot of like different tubes coming out of it, and then the next scene or the next storyboard is a brain, and the brain has like different details of like parts of the brain and some like statistics of the brain that look very cool and very futuristic. And I saw it like I think a year and a half ago, and I was like, I would love to have like a tattoo of these two storyboards, because also like something cool about storyboards is that it's kind of like this space where they're planning the scenes and they're planning the movie and what you're gonna watch. So it has a little bit of that behind the scenes of a movie that I really like. So the two storyboards that I got tattooed, one of them is it's one of the opening scenes is the uh, when they're kind of like turning the ghost the robots on, and it's in a part of the movie very specific where they say like, so this is the shell, and it's like the head of the robot, and then they talk about the ghost inside the shell, which is the brain that you can see in both tattoos, and both are very well put together. It was so hard to find a tattoo artist that was able to draw them because it's like a lot of really small lines. So you also need to be very careful on how you maintain it, because if you get a ton of sun or you try to tan, these lines will they will diffuse into like each other. So you need to be very careful with that. But fun story. Like I worked with. Uh, I got to know the MOSFET's team, and we are building a space called Humans Behind the Machine, which it turns out to be very related to Ghost in a Shell. So definitely, I think there was some inspiration there from attending and just like supporting MOSFET.
Yeah, that's a great story. Yeah, I've watched that movie a couple of times, and it's intense, and I feel like for me personally, I feel like I have to do it in little bits, because it's one of those things like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and those things. Every
Yeah,
time you read it, every time you watch it, you pick up new details about it, and you kind of start connecting to the true story behind all of it. So I really enjoy that. It's something I want to watch again in this new year. I kind of tend to watch it once a year. So yeah, I saw it was really, really cool, but it is very detailed, the tattoo, that's for sure. It's amazing artwork and
yeah.
amazing artist who did that. So yeah.
Yeah,
So
I'm like it's like my precious now. Like I need to take care of it to avoid the art to be destroyed. So now, good
yeah,
that
yeah.
I'm in Seattle, right? Because we don't get a lot of sunlight. But if I go to the beach
Ah,
or anywhere, I'm just like putting a ton of like stuff to avoid it getting like burned by the sun.
that's interesting. I never knew that about tattoos. Interesting. Yeah. So as you said, you are program manager for the GitHub Education, and I don't know if all of these topics that I'm going to mention falls under the umbrella, um, but some of the things that I know about that to me in my mind fits under this umbrella is, like you said, the campus experts. That's the one thing that I'm aware of. And then other things like GitHub Skills, which is something relatively new, where you can kind of create a course material using a combination of a repo and GitHub Actions, and you kind of tie it all together to teach somebody some kind of skill, and base that around some kind of cool automation using actions. And then there is GitHub Classroom, something that I've looked at a couple of times, but I think I can't quite connect what exactly it all offers. So my question to you is, can you unpack like some of these different things? What does fall under the umbrella that you care? What is outside of it? And just what does all of these things offer both students, but then also educators?
Yeah, no, there's like different audience when we talk about education, right? Like we have the students, which are the ones that I work with the most. We have teachers who is kind of like I would say the best or the most important influencers in the world because they basically teach the technologies that folks will be starting to use after they graduate, right? And what I wanted to make sure our team does the manage GitHub Classroom. So GitHub Classroom, look at it as a way that a teacher can improve the way that they manage their classroom. So probably when you were a student, or in my case, I remember when I was a student, when I had to like work with code and do like projects, I would need to kind of like take a USB and probably put my code on a USB and like do my stuff, and then kind of like working with my team was like absolutely awful because no one knew GitHub at that time. I mean, I don't want to say that I'm old though, but uh, it was not one of those things that you would learn in college to know how to work together, which I think is one of the most fundamental things that any developer needs to learn is how do we work together with code. It's very likely that as a developer you will work in a team, if not with other people in the internet or in an office. So learning how to work together is one of those skills that I'm surprised it is not still kind of like part of the curricula, but that has uh, a fundamental part on any student's role or future, especially because it's not only about doing code, but it's also about like communicating, and it's also about like how do you avoid or divide work. So it's much more complex than just like doing a git commit, git push, and git pull, right? Um, so with GitHub Classroom, we try to lower the barrier of entry for both students and teachers so that a teacher, for example, if you're creating curricula, you can distribute that curricula through GitHub. So instead of sharing a link with everyone and then students having to like fork and then it becomes a little bit messy, everyone can click a link and they form like teams and they have like everything set up to start working on a GitHub repository. Now, this helps the teacher because the teacher can see each of the individual repositories that students are working on. And it also helps the student because they would have everything that they need, like Git and GitHub, well, GitHub in specific and GitHub repositories. I like to think about it as not only as code, but as content as well. So especially when we talk about learning, GitHub repositories offer great pieces of content that people is not only pushing code, but they're also pushing documentation, and they're pushing like all of these automations for folks to kind of like learn online. And the same thing happens with GitHub Classroom. So GitHub Classroom not only offers teachers these control on like, hey, what's kind of like the current status of the project? They can review even like, if you are one of those teachers that really wants to get into it, you can see, who developed which part of the code base because you have Git involved. So you can even see like if they really work together or if it was like someone that did everything. But also for teachers, there's this tool that I forgot the specific name, but they can set up a few GitHub actions and automations to review their submissions automatically, so that once they have once all the tests pass, a student is able to merge it and they get like the scoring for the work that they did. So in essence, and then teachers can connect these to any of the tools or platforms that they're using to manage their classroom, or these massive tools where you have like the roster of students and you manage like the grades and everything. There's also some automations there so that teachers have to do less of the work of managing the technical side, and they can focus more on teaching the classes that they have to. On the other side, GitHub Skills, it's not based on the education team, but definitely I think is one of the coolest tools that we have, because it's kind of like, in some sort of ways, is kind of a companion for you to learn, in this case, or for the most that I've used them, how to use Git and GitHub. And it's not only kind of like, here's like this massive like documentation about how to use Git and GitHub, but as you start doing very small steps, it starts to unlock the next step and more knowledge. So that, one of the problems that we've learned is that teaching Git and GitHub is complex. Like, it's not easy, especially when you are getting started in your career. People throw at you like not only how to use like Git commands, but how to use a command line and how to use a terminal. And then it's how to use a new platform. And everyone tries to merge everything in a very short amount of time. And with GitHub Skills, you take a little bit of like more of like baby steps and help folks start to build that learning without overwhelming them with all the knowledge that they might need to use the platform at its fullest. And this is something I don't remember well the name, but it's the reverse pyramid, the reverse concept pyramid, something like that. It's just a lot of video games where they're teaching you how to use the game. They don't make you like fight a massive boss or anything, but first it's like, this is how you walk, and this is how you jump, and this is how you hit the monster. And then they put you like a boss, right? But unless you're playing like Elden Ring or something where you suffer playing, right? But the whole idea is to teach you step by step how to do the thing, and then with GitHub Skills kind of like evolving and showing you more steps that you can do and more stuff, the students students and professional developers have a clear path on how they can master Git and GitHub.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's great. I've used GitHub Skills to just as an experiment to just basically see how I would set up a basic, like, this is how you would do a pull request, and like have a little GitHub skill that takes you through the steps of forking, and then once you fork, you do this and that and that, and then pull request, and then it's merge, and yay, you passed to the GitHub skill. It's really, really useful. It takes a little bit of getting used to at the beginning, just getting an on-ramp and understanding how the actions fit together and how the end of the action triggers the next step and all that kind of stuff. But once you've done it once, like doing the second one is much easier, and the third one is even easier. So it's one of those things where like your knowledge builds on top of each other, and eventually, you'll just end up creating a whole bunch of little courses, and it's great for a bunch of stuff because you can have automated tests. So if you did the JavaScript, for example, correctly, the test should all pass. If they don't, then well, you've done something wrong, so you have to go have a look, and you can try and be as clever as possible to try and detect certain common mistakes so that you can highlight it via comment on the pull request. Like, this is probably what you've done wrong because this specific test has failed. So, yeah, I think there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of potential there. But there is like a little bit of a learning curve, but I think it's fair. It's fair because the value you get out of it, like the learning, the time you have to take to learn it, is worth that time, I think. But you brought up something interesting that I was going to ask later, but I might as well bring it up now. So I was going to ask you for like if you have any advice for like aspiring developers and like young and old, just starting out in their career. But then I wanted to bring in that part where, like exactly like you said, being a maker, a coder, a developer, technical writer, whatever it is that you're doing in tech, writing code or writing the documentation is only one part of the job. A big part of the job is like working with others. And if you don't understand how to do that well, it can often turn a really great job into a drag because you're just struggling to work with people. So I don't know, seeing that you also agree that that is something that's missing from curricula and stuff like that, what advice do you have for people starting their career? Like, what is the important things to think about?
Yeah, no, especially with the last part, I have to say that I'm gonna talk from a very personal space. I remember going to college and there was like this communication class that you need to take, right? And everyone saw that class as just like, oh, just like a class they put to fill up like the curricula, right? Or something that is not important because people, as a developer, you only care about the technical side, right? Like you only want to code and be the perfect developer. And unfortunately, that sense, I don't know if it happens in other countries. I know it happens a lot in Mexico, especially in the university that I went to. Um, but I agree that one of the biggest challenges that I found, and this is from my experience working with students from across the world, is that every culture has its very you can see culture in the communication style of a person. And what I mean by that is there are some cultures that are very open to work in public and share if they are finding a bug or if they are struggling with something. There are some other cultures that prefer to do that privately because they don't want to expose themselves or they don't want to get the attention from other people. There are folks that like very direct communication. So they won't tell you like a very long hello, how you doing? I hope everything is doing great. There's like some other cultures that do that because they really value like building a connection as well. So communication, I would say, is by far one of the hardest things for any developer, especially if you work in open source. Communication is essential so that you don't build on top of someone's pull request by mistake, so that you don't take an issue that probably someone else already has taken, or someone, or just like there's so many parts that require communication in our everyday lives that uh, I think it needs a little bit more. It should be taken a little bit more seriously, especially in a world where working with folks from the other side of the world, which is like you and I, we're talking. You're in South Africa. I mean, Seattle is almost like across the world. So cultures change a lot. I'm understanding that. Uh, there are different communication styles. I would say helps a lot of folks to get more confident of being able to propose things, but also to understand the behaviors that they see other people are doing. So definitely communication and understanding different cultures, I'd say, is one of the most important skills that you can develop. And I understand that for some folks, like working in a national or local company is more than enough, and that's okay. But you never know. Like I would even like within a country, culture is so different. So I think it's still very important that we dedicate some time to uh, think or learn how different communication styles work, and uh, that will effectively help us to have a better workspaces and uh, healthier communication channels with both like the work that we do professionally, the work that we do personally, and in general like with the communities as well that we help. Um, I completely forgot what was the other question though. I got too much into this.
No, 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 no. That's perfect. Yeah, no, it was just like any. I think you've covered all the bases there. I think it's good. I agree with what you've said there. With that in mind, and talking about communication, so as an educator, of course, that is key. Like, if you can't communicate well, you're going to have a tough time teaching people because not only do you have to transfer knowledge, but you have to do it in a way where you can keep their attention and get their interest, make them excited about the stuff that you're learning, because that's the only way that we retain knowledge is if we're actually enjoying what we're doing. So you have to think about how
Yeah.
you communicate. So along those lines, there's so many ways to teach these days. Like we touched on GitHub Classroom, for example. We touched on the automated side of it, where it's your kind of playing a game with against or not against with a machine learning thing like GitHub Skills. You know, it's like you're there, the human doing your thing, and there's a machine telling you whether you succeeded or failed and stuff like that. And then there is another thing that's I've kind of tried it and then stopped, and now I'm kind of considering going back to it because of a talk I heard at Universe, GitHub Universe. And interestingly enough, when I was reading up about some of the stuff that you've been doing, that you've done in your past, you were actually involved with a research paper around this idea of streaming on places like Twitch, and specifically around audience and streamer participation at the scale of Twitch. So thinking about that, and I've heard so many people say that Twitch can actually be a great place to teach. What do you think about that, and what advice and thoughts do you have around this whole idea of using a platform that most people won't even associate with this idea? But do you agree that this can be a successful platform? And if so, do you have any like kind of advice for people that are thinking about doing this?
Yeah, so Twitch, that research, it was such in a great time because it was like before the pandemic, and I got this awesome opportunity to work with a lab in West Virginia University and Carnegie Mellon to um, they were doing something called audience participation in games, which is basically, when you have an audience like on Twitch, how can you involve your audience to be part of something that they're watching, like you're consuming content, but at the same time, you are building that content as well with the host. And this whole research came out of the Twitch Plays Pokemon stream, which happened like a few years ago. People had kind of like the control of the character on Pokemon. I don't remember which version, but basically, like anyone on the audience was able to send a message in chat, and depending on the command that they sent, the character on the video game would do something. And it was a bomb of an event to have like Twitch Plays Pokemon. Like a huge community of developers came together. They normally would lose all of their items, so they would like release all the Pokemons and lose all the Master Balls and all the Pokeballs that they had. So it was hilarious to see it, but it was really interesting because you can analyze a lot of like human behavior uh, with these with these games. And I think there was like this item that you were not able to throw away in the game, and the audience took that as kind of like the relic, like the most important item, and they had like stories about the shell. It was a shell, about the shell and how the shell represents the game and represents what they were there for, and it was absolutely incredible how a community was built around that. Um, I think for Twitch has it's very interesting because I really like Twitch as a medium of learning. I think one of the challenges that Twitch has to become a learning platform is that it's very, very immediate, which means if you lose a show, you lose the content. So probably you won't be able to watch a replay around Twitch. And that's what makes other platforms become so successful, is that you can probably, if you miss it, that's okay, but then watch you can watch the replay, or you can watch the recording afterwards. And with Twitch that happens, but unfortunately, like a lot of those pieces of content get lost, because Twitch has like these 30 days VOD time lapse. Some accounts will have that like unlimited though, but this typical thing is like 5 to 30 days. So what we've learned through this research, my job was a lot more on kind of like how audiences work as you grow your channel. So we define like 5 different clusters of channels on Twitch, depending on how big they were and which were kind of like the relationships that we see. And it's very interesting because, when you're a small channel, you can really create personal connections between the audience and the host. But then you have like these stadium, we call them stadium size channels, where you have like 35,000 people watching, which is incredible to think about that. And it becomes kind of like a stadium where, it stops being like Juan and I don't know, Fer or whoever it is, and it's just like, hey, Chad, how's it going? So it's like, oh, that's interesting. When do you become Chad, and when are you like someone, right? So at the end, our thing was much more about how do audience and host relate and communicate during these kind of like growth, depending on where your channel was sitting on. In terms of education, there's some really cool things that I've seen around. I've seen that folks are, first of all, they feel less pressure to join a live stream, especially if you have guests. So if you're a streamer and you're like, hey, do you want to jump in and chat? People are more likely to jump in and chat than if you tell them like, hey, I'm making this YouTube video about XYZ. Do you want to jump in? They're like, oh, but I need to prepare because this is going to be recorded and this is going to be so definitely there's a little bit more planning sometimes on YouTube. And for learning, I think Twitch still has a long way to go. I think it is a great platform for building great connections and building a community and bringing everyone together. Uh, a lot of folks are using these learn in public type of streams where you probably are learning some new thing and you stream yourself doing so. It's really cool because then chat kind of helps you out as well. If you're making a mistake, they will point that out in Twitch chat. But also it's a little bit, since it's not as formal as probably like the traditional education system, some folks feel more enticed to participate. So if something funny happens, people take that opportunity to kind of like jump into chat and engage. So I think it allows people to engage a little bit more and really kind of like build a community around learning these type of things. Now, what I see a lot of streamers are doing is that they do the live stream and then they take the recording, edit, and then publish that on other platforms so that they can have this content evergreen. And I think that's like the best move that you can do, because then you feed from like the other platforms audience back to Twitch, and then you feed your Twitch audience back to these other platforms. So it's kind of like a very good cycle that I've seen has working really good, especially if you're interested in creating like content. Doing that will really help you out to grow your channel really fast.
Yeah, that's good advice. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm definitely trying it again. But I think what you've said here is interesting. Is maybe I think maybe it's just you have to rethink based on the platform, what you do, how you do things. I like this idea where people think like because Twitch is a little ephemeral in a sense, it's more forgiving, and so people aren't so concerned about making a blunder on a live stream because they're like, it's going to go away in a couple of days, it's fine. Whereas if it's something that's going to be, to stay around forever, they might be like, I have to, like you said, be like really well prepared for this so that I don't get called out because I said something that wasn't quite accurate or whatever the case may be. But then
Yeah.
maybe it's a natural evolution of the education system. I mean, I think everybody acknowledges that it's not what it should be. It's not what it can be, and maybe this is one of those experiments that a lot of people are trying to see if maybe this is an evolution of education, and this is what the the folks of nowadays gravitate toward. This is how they'd like to learn, by kind of observing and then joining in when they feel comfortable. Um,
Hmm.
as part of like a lot of the stuff that I do, especially with the Mycelium network, is I try and that's how I try and entice people to get involved is by not forcing them like into the public or saying you have to do this thing, but kind of allowing them to participate on the sidelines for as long as they need, and then starting to slowly maybe speak up about something and say and see that okay, wait, that wasn't that bad, and then they'll try it again, and they'll maybe try it again. Um, so I think
Yeah, there are a
another
couple.
aspect. Go for it.
Oh, sorry. I think there's a couple of really cool things that I've noticed, and the first one is, for example, if you see Harvard CS50, it's one of these like massive online courses on getting started with computer science, and the fact that it has like both components. It has a pre-recording component and then a live component to it as well. That worked really good, and it's opening, like Harvard classes to everyone in the world, and you can watch them
Yeah.
whenever fits your time best. Like you don't need to be there
Hmm.
9 a.m. and probably kind of like tired of everything that happened the day before, or probably you didn't have a good sleep. You still kind of like need to be there, and that flexibility is welcomed by a lot of folks. And
Yeah.
so the first thing is, yes, there's a lot of new content, and especially after like the last couple of years, the
Hmm.
amount of content that was produced is incredible. So anyone, you can learn a ton of stuff. I think the hardest thing now is navigating the content and finding the content
Yes.
that fits your style the most, or that is kind of like quality content. The other side is that there was a lot of experimentation being done during these last 2 years. And one of the things that I really liked of one of our student events, they organized a series of workshops in on Minecraft. So they brought like their entire community to Minecraft, and they kind of like everyone has their characters, and it's like fun because you're playing a video game, but they're also kind of like learning and teaching and stuff, and people really like that. And I mean, I'm the least creative person in the world, right? But uh, I think the fact that people had the opportunity to experiment with new mediums and new places and new spaces uh, really helped out to find out different ways to do the things that we have always done the same way, right? Like you're now, if you want to become a software developer, software engineer, computer scientist, you're not now entirely like locked into a classroom, but there's like so many different ways in which you can build your career. And for example, open source is a great way to gather professional experience without the hustle of um, internships and finding a job. You can start learning some really good professional skills just by jumping into a repository and asking how can I help to make this repository better, right? And a lot of that is what we talk is not only the communication but also the technical side that you can learn through open source.
Yeah, yeah. And to that point, so Stormy Peters, who's also at GitHub now, mentioned during a talk she gave at Universe that by 2030, it's estimated that we'll need around 1.6 million new developers joining the tech industry. That's a lot of new developers in what? It's 7 years remaining. So, I mean, GitHub is doing a lot of this stuff. So I'm going to jump between a couple of things here. So I think the first question I want to ask around that topic is, how do you see, what do you see as the role of communities, such as the Mycelium Network, in helping us get to that 1.6 million? But also, something that I'm very interested in is twofold. One is using open source as the vehicle, and two, making diversity, equity, and inclusion a natural part of these communities. It's not this thing that you like tack on at the end to try and like, oh yeah, we have to be diverse. It's kind of just naturally, it naturally just happens because of the way you communicate, maybe the platforms you choose. I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that whole big topic.
Yeah, no, these are three big topics. I think So for us, communities are fundamental at GitHub, especially with GitHub Education. We do um, we do a lot of efforts with, for example, campus experts. Um, it's not only it's kind of like a very different type of program where you would normally see these ambassador programs in the industry where it's like, oh yeah, teach XYC's like technologies. I think with campus experts, what we're trying to do is to be a little bit more in depth on the role of communities, especially with student communities. And a big part of that for us is making sure, first, is making sure that the student has all the tools and resources that they need to be able to build a successful community. And it's not only, I think one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen is that a lot of folks open a community because it's the thing that other people are doing. And instead of that, we wanted to make sure that the students that are part of the program, that they understand that a community is a tool that you can use to get X amount of people or a certain population to a specific goal. So instead of thinking of a community as the end goal of like, let's build I don't know, a water community because we want everyone to know about water, is like, is a community the right tool to make sure that that happens? Or is it just, do you just need like a conference about like water and not a community? And I think as developers, we try to use communities as the tool that solves every one of our problems, and we want to make sure that people think a little bit more about that, about their communities. So the first thing that we do is we teach students 6 different modules, so they could have core skills to organize or have a community. So we first take them through a community assessment. So basically, like, what's your community looking like? What are some of the struggles? What's the mission of the community? Then we make them go through diversity and inclusion, which is module number 2, and it's essentially thinking of what are some minorities in your city, in your location, that might be feeling left behind or left outside of these events. And then once they analyze which are these communities, how can you make sure that they feel welcomed in your community? And how can you kind of like reach out to them, or where can you find them so that you can do like an intentional effort to invite them and be part of the events that you're doing? And I think these two are kind of like very core components of the program, because it's not only about, let's do diversity and inclusion because it's what, as you mentioned, right? Like, it's the last thing that we will care about, or it's like what other people are doing, but rather it's like, who are some people in my university that probably don't feel welcomed to join these events? And that's very different in each country, right? Like every city has a different set of groups that might not fit that they belong in tech. So it's not something that we as kind of like program managers can say like, yeah, you need to focus on this population because they are a minority. But rather we leave that to the student, and we kind of like guide them into like really understanding who these populations might be, so that they can then start kind of like planning how they can reach out to them, invite them, and make sure that they have a safe space for them to be to attend or to be, or to just like join the event. Then we teach them about like how to do workshops, how to give talks. We teach them how to um, talk about technical concepts in a much more easier way so that everyone can understand. And then at the end, they do a community proposal, which is basically the culmination of everything that that they have learned in the past 5 modules, and they make a proposal based on what they see the community struggles are, where they want the community to be, what are some diversity and inclusion barriers that they might find, and then they build this proposal of, okay, if I want to solve issue number 1, I need to make a workshop about technology XYZ. Or if I want more people, the most common thing that we see is that students want to kind of like bridge the gap between industry and academia. So it's like, okay, why don't you bring some people from the industry into your university to have like conversations about things that they're looking for? And some people are like, I want people to be together and get to know each other, because sometimes university can be a little bit isolating. So they organize like get-togethers or a hackathon or some fun project. So again, it's not much about like using a community as the end goal, but rather as a tool to bring your community where you want it to be. And then events serve the same thing. We see all the time of like, I want to organize the biggest hackathon in the world because we want to be the biggest one. And it's like, that's fun though, but like, it's you can have 1,000 people, and if they have like a terrible experience, they won't come back. Why don't you
Mm,
focus on like
mm.
a smaller event where everyone has an absolutely crazy great amount of time so that they come back in the future or they have something cool to take back with them after the event finishes. So it's a
Yeah.
lot of like going kind of like making students rethink about of all of these things that they have heard, and making sure that they have these deep understanding on not only what they're doing but also how can they take their communities where they want them to be. And going back
Mm.
to the question, because I deviated a ton, uh, the same thing happens with learning and communities, right? I know there's, I think for every city that I've visited, there's someone that wants to get more people into open source, want to make sure that people have someone that they can reach out to
Mm.
learn or grow their skills. And I think communities can play a really good role there to, like they understand the context, the local context, and they are going to be better like teaching new technologies or helping folks to learn about tech and computer science, better than any company from the US will be able to.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
communities are kind of like those folks that, and this is why, for example, the Mozilla Developer Network is so important. Like you publish the documentation and you publish these amazing like resources for folks, but they don't work if nobody can like teaches them locally, or they take them and they make their own and then they modify it a little bit so that folks in their city are able to understand it better. So you create this kind of
Yes.
like neutral documentation, and then people can, as kind of like content creators, right? Like they take these things that they see and they make their own, they modify it, they put, I don't know, if you're in Mexico, you put a little bit of salsa to it, and then you share
Mhm,
that
mhm.
to your community, right? And that's kind of like the
Yeah,
whole
yeah.
goal of community is like these people understand the struggles and their communities better than we do, and they can create
Mhm.
content that is more fitting to the local context than what we would ever gonna do. Because if you go or I go to these communities, I'm probably gonna teach the neutral documentation, and they'll be like, "Okay, that was fun, but like I didn't get it." And it's better
Mm.
if someone that really kind of like is building that community and that sense of belonging and that trust with the community as well, is they
Yeah.
have better tools to give these new content to their communities better than we could ever do. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, in terms of, I don't know if that makes sense to you. I think I
Yeah,
hope.
yeah, totally. No. Yeah,
um,
that's great. Yeah. So I think
what
language plays a
can you
big
remind
role
me of
there,
the other
right?
questions? Yeah.
I think you kind of touched
Oh yeah.
on something here. I think language plays a big role, like when you talk about local communities taking content and then making it their own. I think that one of the big things is just the language. Like if it's only available in English, that in itself might be a barrier. I think in the beginning you mentioned that like get up and teaching that is get up less, but to some extent, but get more specifically is often not taught at the beginning, and so
Mm-hmm.
we've actually seen that in a group that you would think this is not a problem, it has been the one big stumbling block. Like, for example, at the Write the Docs conference in Portland, just speaking with these technical writers that's their job is writing technical content. When you ask them what is one of the biggest hurdles to contributing to an open source project, say for example MDN Web Docs, they would say Git. Honestly, I'm not sure how to use Git properly. I'm always scared I mess everything up. I'm not 100% sure how the whole branching and pull request thing works, and that is why I really don't. There are, of course, other factors as well. That's cultural, and sometimes it's us maybe not yet creating as welcoming a space as we think we are. That's also, but far and away, one of the biggest things is just this core thing. And I think if you're in that community, you will understand that much better than somebody looking from the outside. Because as a coder or something, you might think like, Git is just it's not easy by no means, but the basic commands you need to be productive aren't that hard. But that is for you who uses this
Yeah.
every day. For somebody who that is not core to doing their job, it's a different story. And I think that plays into the spoken language as well.
Yes. Language and I think well, this is a very we can nerd about like documentation and stuff for like ages, but um, there's one thing that I met Rachel Lee Neighbors. She is absolutely
Hmm.
amazing. And we were talking about this because we were going through the same struggle of like, we want to make sure our documentation is accessible to everyone. But it's so
Hmm.
hard because of like maintaining one piece of documentation in English is hard. And then you try to
Yeah.
translate everything into multiple languages, it becomes absolutely unmanageable. So, especially if you
Hmm.
have a small team, right? If you have
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
thousand person team, like congratulations, and it's great to hear there's like such teams. But what she mentioned, and I think this makes a ton of sense, is that one of the best tips that you can do, first of all, yes, communities play a massive role there. Uh, but the second thing is making sure that your documentation is easily translatable by machine, which means
Okay.
a lot of folks would click the Google Chrome or kind of like Firefox, kind of like auto translate tool to get the
Hmm.
documentations on their own language. So making
Hmm.
sure that that translation is a quality translation and making your documentation easily translatable by a machine plays a better role than redoing your whole documentation in a different language. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so so there. I mean, I this is going to be a little bit of not me thinking of me product maintaining, like thinking of product and documentation as a product is like maintaining languages is so hard, so expensive, and it really requires a lot of resources. If you don't have the team to be able to do so, what you can do
Hmm.
is to make sure that it is translatable by a machine and that it makes sense after the machine translates it.
Hmm. 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 Do you think that is simply avoiding stuff like jargon, avoiding not spelling out acronyms before you actually start using them? Do you think those are the kinds of things that you would do?
Yeah, no, totally. I think there's I mean, I'm not an expert in documentation, unfortunately. I would love to. Um, but there's
Hmm.
very small, and I think this has been best practices on documentation writing for a long time that really help out the algorithm to make the translation the best.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I would love to get somebody on here to talk about just. I spoke with Chris Mills, who's been doing technical writing for a very long time, but it'd be interesting to talk to like maybe two or three technical writers on one of these episodes and just because I think it's so critical to have good documentation, especially for open source projects. I think some of the most successful open source projects are successful because their documentation is so good. I know one of the reasons Vue.js got such a big fan base in China as opposed to React, which the rest of the world seems to have chosen as their framework of choice, is because the documentation for Vue is available in Chinese from the get go. Because Evan Yo is from China originally, and so it was important for him to ensure that that documentation is available in Chinese because he knows how important that is to people in China. So it's interesting, and I mean for myself as a developer and a maker, if I want to use your tool or your framework or your whatever, if your documentation is terrible, then that is definitely the first place where I'm gonna probably see if there's another option available
Yeah.
that has good documentation. So I think it's something that's critical to understand well, and then to understand how to write this, like you said, so it is machine translatable in a efficient manner. So it doesn't translate in a way that it no longer makes sense. Like you read it in Spanish
Yeah.
and you're like, yeah, I'm not exactly sure that's what they were trying to say here, and you kind of have to switch back to the English version. That's really good. That's interesting. I haven't thought about it from that way. That's very
Yeah.
interesting.
And also like as an open source maintainer. uh, making sure that your documentation is clean and understandable helps you onboard more folks into using your tools. So it
Mm-hmm.
also ends up benefiting you in terms of like how many people are using the tools. If that's kind of like the goal of you creating like the project, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think for a lot of like the research that we've done with open source projects, thinking like why is it like sometimes hard for some folks to use open source every day, is because onboarding to using like these tools sometimes is a little bit hard for some folks that either like they're changing their careers or they're just getting started and they hear about like XYZ technology, but they don't understand like the onboarding. Unfortunately, like people leave really fast. Um, and talking about open source, and open source for learning, I think so. So some of the research that we've done in the past is for us. I think internships are awesome, but unfortunately, not everyone has access to an internship close to them. Internships are still very geolocated to the US, Canada, and Europe. Um, there's some in India that are starting, which I think is amazing. But unfortunately, like outside of these regions, it's really hard to get into an internship. Either you will need to apply to the company and then see if they will offer you a visa to be able to work during the internship, which then opens like a whole different kind of worms. Um, or you would need to find other ways in which you can gain experience. And at the end, that's like the whole goal, right? Like we want to make sure that folks get this experience of being out there and learning how things are done outside of the academia before they graduate, because it's really valuable for them and for the industry. At the end, um, something that we've learned is if just by supporting like student developers, we help the whole industry. Like if we make sure that folks before they graduate, they come with more experience and with better tools and better, I don't know, classes, the whole industry like levels up as well. I mean, it's in a long term, it's not going to be immediate, but definitely it's worth making the investment to help the next generation to have everything that they need to be awesome. On the other side,
Yeah.
I think open source is very democratic on the way that it works. So, any as a student, you're able to go to any open source repository and see what are some of the issues that are open and explore kind of like the technology. And what I really like about open source is that no one asks you for your resume to make a contribution. Like it would suck if you would have to be like, oh yeah, here's my experience on this type of projects. These are some contributions that I've made, and this is why my pull request should be the one that you accept. That would break open source at its core. And
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well
so
said.
so uh, open source offers a very democratic entrance for everyone to make these contributions and start gaining more experience with how code is built. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I love the fact that it doesn't matter where you're coming from. So we are trying to find ways in which we can help folks to kind of like contribute to these open source projects. A lot of that as well is that some of the challenges is navigating open source, which is
Mm-hmm.
how can I find an issue that I can contribute to, which has been a challenge from like eternity. Uh,
Yeah.
and not only that, but also how do I make sure a lot of folks, especially students that are making their first open source contribution, there's a lot of imposter syndrome involved. Of
Mm-hmm.
you have like the code that probably the maintainer or the contributors are looking for, but the students really doubt themselves of like if this is some valuable piece of code.
Yeah.
So another big problem that we've seen is imposter syndrome in the industry, which I think is kind of like a pandemic. Everyone has like imposter syndrome at some point in their career. But when you're,
Mm-hmm.
once again, when we talk about cultures, right, exposing your work to the world and having like an open source maintainer of a project that probably you're a big fan of review your code, that's like challenging if it's the first time that you're making these contributions.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
For sure.
there's a few challenges, but from what I've seen, more companies are putting attention into the activities that folks have on GitHub. So if you're
Mm.
making contributions to open source, that is something that will boost your resume once you're applying to kind of like formal jobs or kind of like
Yeah.
traditional jobs. So a lot of folks and a lot of recruiters are starting to use GitHub more to verify your experience. They check out like if you have any projects there, if kind of like your even that we've heard weird stories of even if your profile looks like professionalish, which that's like a very weird thing to say, but I kind of like understand what they're meaning. It's like, oh yeah, you don't have a really good profile picture. Um, but definitely the activity that you're doing GitHub can essentially help you out to make your resume or your profile outstand from others as you apply for jobs afterwards. And it
Yeah.
also like
Yeah.
I've heard a ton of stories of people getting jobs out of GitHub. So people that become continuous contributors or recurrent contributors to open source projects, they get visibility from other developers. And I mean, if I can get someone that is contributing a lot to an open source project that I'm building my technology off from, I would totally
Yeah.
send them like a message of, hey, are you looking for a job? I've seen your, I have full transparency of how you work, and I think this is
Exactly.
extremely valuable. So
Yeah.
I really hope, and it's not a hope, I think it's something that we're naturally moving towards to, that first of all, open source offers a democratic way of getting professional experience in, I would say, its fullest component. Second of all, it can help you get a job, especially if you're getting started in tech or if it's you change your careers, making open source contributions and being active in a project might bump your resume or your application to a job. And third, it's a great way to meet really cool people that are doing really cool stuff, and you never know. Probably one of them can get you to your next job or your first job as well.
Yeah, that's great. 100% agree. Yeah, no, you've answered all my questions and then some. So that's great. Really love that. So I have basically two questions left. The one is, so we've talked a lot about students and all the opportunities there are and all the things that GitHubs offer. But as you've worked with all these students and you've seen what works and what doesn't work and some new trends maybe that's emerging or anything, is there anything specific advice you have for educators? Like, are there some things that you've seen that, if you incorporate this into how you teach, it really works well with students? And these are things that's kind of like, that doesn't kind of gel with students.
Yeah, no, totally. I think educators in particular are we put a lot of responsibility on their hands. Like they don't only have to create a lot of the curricula, they also need to. I would say it's kind of like a performance art, right? Like you need to engage people and keep them excited about what they're learning, but also you need to teach them. So it's like
Yeah.
it's not only kind of like watching a TV show on whatever platform, but it's also how do you make sure that people really kind of like understand what I'm talking about and they can take that into something useful afterwards. Um, and they also need to review and give comments and feedback to all the work that students are doing. So my thing with teachers is that sometimes, especially for some schools that, well, I think it's across multiple institutions, but teachers do a lot of work. Um, the best piece of advice that I would give is that they're not alone. Like there's a ton of other teachers there that are looking forward to sharing what they have done. From the GitHub side, we have the GitHub Campus Advisors, and we have a private GitHub discussion with all the teachers. And it has been really
Oh.
cool because they share some of their resources. So, for example, if a teacher has done an intro to algorithms and data structures course on GitHub, they will share. Sometimes they will share, depending on the college, because some colleges really kind of like protect their
Yeah.
property. But some of them are very cool and they share their resources with other teachers. So if you're giving the same class, you already have the content. So you only need to worry about the performance part of your job. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
on the other side, I think there's very small things that you can do to make sure that people really engage with your classroom. In our case, I know it sounds like it's not a lot, but we with GitHub, you're able to, if you reach out to GitHub, please do if you're a teacher. We would love to help you. But we send like a swag bag to teachers with Mona stickers and Octocat stickers. Mona is our mascot for folks who probably haven't heard that before. We send them like cheat sheets and a lot of other resources that they can use while they're teaching. Um, and it turns out that the impact of these small resources, like the cheat sheet, is by far one of the most used tool because you have like all the
Mm,
Git commands that probably you will be using in one single piece of paper. And it's kind of like these very small things when we support students that do a ton of impact on their experience managing classrooms.
yeah.
And so reach out to us. We would love to help. And I think the most important is that you're not alone. There's a lot of other teachers that are in the same journey as you are. If you're just getting started, I would recommend reaching out and talking with teachers that have more experience, learning from them. Um, and I think there's some really some great resources there for teachers to take. And yeah, I think as a whole, you have a very important job. Like you're preparing the next generation, and want to make sure
Hmm.
that you have all the tools that you need to do that the best way possible. And from stories from campus advisors, we've heard some really beautiful stories of for we have help. I'm talking about Mexico a lot because I'm from Mexico, so I have
Hmm.
really good kind of communication with them. But we sent kind of like a swag bag to a teacher in an indigenous school in Guerrero, which indigenous schools unfortunately are very under resourced in the country. So and for them, like the fact that they got like the stickers and the cheat sheets was like life changing for the students. Like they were very excited about the classroom afterwards. They were really
Yeah.
engaged with the teacher, and the teacher has like I don't know, huge round of applause to that teacher because he is teaching like a technology that is in another language to folks that speak in one of the multiple indigenous languages in the country, and they're building some absolutely amazing things. And they send us like a photo every quarter of like a project that they built, and you can always see like the students with like their GitHub stickers and feeling very proud of that. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's like a super heartwarming story. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's like the small things count a lot. I think with teachers, and there's been a lot of movement in the last 2 years of how we teach, and this is like
Hmm.
the right time for us, or what we've noticed as well is that this is the right time to reconnect with the students, especially if you have the ability to have them there in person. It's a great time to reconnect and really build these trust relations with students.
Yeah.
Teaching is being a teacher is much more than just like teaching. You're like a psychologist, a therapist. You are
Very true.
everything, content creator. So we I don't know. I'm just like very astonished with everything that they do.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, this was awesome. And there's so many good things shared here. I only have one closing question for you, and that is, what is the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
I think the best piece of advice that I've received is it's a great question. I think so. I'm gonna give some context because like I was building like before I joined GitHub, I was building like a hackathon league in Mexico, and
Hmm.
it was so hard because it was when hackathons were not like a thing. So when we went to like sponsors, our companies to sponsor us, they were like, "Oh, but what's a hackathon? Are you gonna hack the bank?" And which I will laugh at that right now, right? But at that time, it was like, okay, I expect that they don't know what this is all about, and it was so hard. It was so hard to raise funds to do the work that we wanted to do. And a friend of mine told me that uh, if it was easy, anybody would be able to make it. And it's like when you're going through some hardship on your job or your work or something, it's like if you're one of the few that has the ability to do it, it's because like it's not easy. Like it's going to be challenging sometimes to do the work that we do. And I think that for me was like, yeah, that makes sense. Like we're the first ones doing that. We're doing that at the time. Uh, people have tried in the past but didn't work out successfully, and I was like, okay, that do make sense. Like, so yeah, I think that's my best piece of advice.
Yeah, that's great advice, and that's for sure. You can see it everywhere. Nobody wants to be the first because it's hard to be the first to do something.
Yeah,
Even if it's just a variation on what somebody else has already done, it's always hard to be the first one. You see it in these online conferences, like the chat is really quiet until the first person posts the "Hey, welcome everybody,"
yeah,
and then
right.
suddenly it starts rolling. So it's like that thing, like everybody finds it hard to be the first. So if you're the first to do X in your community or in your country, then no, it's going to be hard, but it's probably going to be worth it at the same time. So I think it's great advice, and yeah, people should definitely take that to heart. Thanks
Yeah,
so much, Juan. This was a wonderful conversation. I'm so glad this happened, and I'm so excited to share this with the community. Um, have a wonderful rest of your day, and speak to you soon.
talk to you all soon. Have a good one.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Mycelium Network Podcast. If you're not already, please subscribe, star, and leave a review for us in your podcatcher of choice. This helps others find us and helps us make a better podcast for you, our listeners. You can also find and follow us on Twitter at Network Mycelium and join the community on Discord. All the links are available in the show notes.